Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I'm here taking a look at Anvil magazine number 3. This is another really good installment of this magazine, and there's a lot to talk about in it. There's a whole bunch of different things going on in here. There's two full color comics. We have a number of really interesting and very different kinds of short stories. For the beginning, as usual, I want to take a close look at just one of them. And that is, as usual, the story I thought about the most after finishing the issue. In that case, that's going to be Rosabell's Parthenope, which is one of the two stories in here that has a title you will most likely have to Google after reading it. And this story is by Laura J. Campbell, and it is a very different kind of story in a way that I'm really excited to see because, I've spoken before a lot, especially in the first volume. A lot of the stories were very focused on the fantasy genre. And as time has gone on, it split out a lot more. And this is kind of a paranormal mystery story. It's in a sci fi setting, but honestly, you could take pretty much everything done here in this story and put it in a modern day setting, and it would still work basically as well. Like this could happen on a naval vessel at sea just as easily as it could happen in this story. What's really impressive about it is the technological aspects of the story are used to enhance both the mystery and the supernatural element in a way that's really cool. And I spent a lot of time thinking to myself, is there a way, is the genre of this story changeable? Could you make it not sci-fi and still have the same story? The answer is no, you really can't. Even if you were to set this on a ship at sea, it would still have that speculative element, that element of the supernatural. And honestly, the sci-fi does enhance this as well because it makes it much easier to build the kind of situation that Campbell is looking for as she tells the story. It's typically my approach to these to give a broader review first, and then give a more targeted review. Now, when I do my retrospective over the rest of the magazine in my next video, it's harder to break those out, and I tend to just sort of flip back and forth very quickly. But since we're just talking about one particular story here, I want to paint the broad strokes and then analyze some of the more spoilery details that I really appreciated. If you have this volume of the magazine and you haven't read it yet, and you want to avoid spoilers, just be aware. And if you're thinking about getting it, I would probably skip the spoiler section even then, and probably my entire retrospective in the next video, because there's a lot of good stuff here, and it's better to take it in as it's intended, I think, before I go through and I kind of pick and I poke at things and I say why I think they work or why they didn't work. As always, my goal here is to be as constructive as possible, and a lot of this is spitballing. I think the job of a reader who comments on a story is very different from the job of, say, an editor who's trying to develop a story, or even, an author offering another author feedback. And primarily when I'm looking at Anvil, I'm trying to speak as a reader and give useful feedback. So I'm just giving my reactions and my initial knee-jerk thoughts for the benefit of the author, because I know as an author myself, those thoughts tell me how what I did impacted people, what they took away from it. And I think that is a very useful class of feedback to get. And it's very different from what you get from an editor or another author giving you their thoughts on a story. So, all that said, let's talk about Rosabell's Parthenope. If you're curious, Parthenope is one of the sirens. In particular, she was the one that Odysseus met in the Odyssey, and he threw herself into the sea after he stopped his ears with wax, so she couldn't lure him into the waves. Very, very interesting set of symbolism there, none of which really has anything to do with this story. I don't know if, in point of fact, the Rosabell Parthenope is a medical ship set in Campbell's world. I don't know if the name choice is significant in any other stories that take place on in this world. Given that the story is named after the ship, I'm assuming this is a bit of a standalone, and this ship is not something that Campbell has come back to time and again. Otherwise, why would you name this particular story after the ship? Just my impressions. I don't think understanding that, this is a siren is important to the story, because we're not going to get the ship's name explained to us in the narrative. And honestly, I don't have a problem with the way this particular title is used. I'm going to talk a little bit about another title that struck me as a little bit stranger, but we're not going to go into that in this video. Tune back in on Friday if you're curious about that. So, long story short, this is the story of a haunted medical ship. Surprise, right? A lot of people die on medical vessels or in hospitals. That's why you have so many ghost stories about them, right? I'm currently working on the idea for such a story myself. This is interesting because it is a medical starship. So it goes places in response to emergencies, and then takes the injured people to larger medical facilities. It's like an interstellar ambulance, essentially. But the trips are much longer than your typical ambulance trip. An ambulance maybe half an hour tops to get back to the average, its home base hospital. I would assume. I don't actually know a whole lot about this. That particular, area of work. I've never been an EMT. I have families that have worked in hospitals, but they aren't EMTs either, so I don't know exactly how this all works. But the Parthenope is essentially an ambulance spaceship. It goes out to places where there are disasters or war zones, perhaps. You don't get a full picture of, how big its area of responsibility would be. I assume probably does something like that on occasion. In this case, it's responding to a mining disaster, bringing a lot of people who were injured in a mining disaster to a medical facility to treat them. And along the way, people are dying. And okay, yeah, again, it's a hospital ship. A lot of people die on hospital ships, but they are dying in specific numbers, in specific grouping, in a way that is very suspicious. And at the same time, a name is appearing in the computer for a short period of time that doesn't match any of the patients. That name is Bathu Uratane. Very strange name. So all of these things are strange and mysterious, and the chief doctor of a particular shift named Jinnah is working to sort out what is going on with this mystery signal and these mystery deaths. So on the one hand, you have Bathu Uratane. Does it belong in the computer? On the other hand, you have people dying. And as you investigate it, you start to see these patterns to it. And eventually, the rumor, or perhaps the speculation, starts that Bathu Uratane is a ghost, like a literal ghost in the machine. So the hospital ship is haunted, and something he's doing is causing these deaths. That's a really fascinating premise for a story. It's a little creepy. It's something you can honestly see happening pretty easily if you've ever worked in any kind of bureaucratic setting. There are always, stray bits of something floating around in the bureaucracy. So you can have this name turn up. Bathu doesn't sound like a normal name. And in fact, they research it and they determine that, well, no one's ever seen somebody named Bathu. So it looks like a name, but is it really? Is it some kind of typographical error that somebody put in trying to enter someone else's name? Well, that doesn't look like the case. The Jinnah and her co-workers do a lot of very intuitive, natural steps to try and sort out what is going on. It makes a lot of sense. One thing I don't like about many creepy stories is the authors of them will force their characters to take very unnatural steps to build the creepiness of the situation, to escalate things, and that never happens in the Rosabell Parthenope, which I really appreciated. One of the things that's made it very hard for me to get invested in a lot of creepy slash horror driven stories is that the characters act completely irrationally, and I just don't find that scary. I find that stupid and frustrating. So the stories have the entirely incorrect emotional response from me. This story avoids that, and I really appreciated that. Now, I didn't find it particularly creepy. Again, I have worked in some large, specifically a library, where information can get sucked into the system and be very difficult to then completely expunge. And of course, that's an arm of the county government, so any government branch is also like that. So while I found the phantom name appearing and disappearing from the system curious, I didn't find it particularly creepy. The way the hospital workers, some of them get very emotionally worked up about this, struck me as a bit strange. But I have had, without going too deep into it, I have had adventures with bureaucracy and names not being spelled properly and things like that are ongoing, after 10 years of trying to get them sorted out. So I guess it didn't strike me as strange as some of these people felt it, but I'm also not working in a hospital where people are dying on a regular basis, which can, add a certain degree of tension to it, which, is totally different from the kind of situation that I am dealing with in that particular aspect. So, all in all, I found the approach to building the tension, showing the patterns, to setting up the mystery very, very satisfying. And when the mystery is finally solved and all the pieces are put into place, it fit. And I can't emphasize how important that is for me. I have read, a number of these kind of creepypasta stories and other things like that, where when you get to the end of the story and the characters are figuring out what's happened and the pattern is shown to you, regardless of how it works out for the protagonist, if it doesn't fit, it's frustrating, and I feel like I've wasted the time I've sunk into that story. And Campbell doesn't do that here. Every piece of this story is very, very well considered, from the name Bathu Uratane to the way the computer systems are slowly explained to us to help us understand how all of the hints we are getting will eventually fit into the pattern of what's happening here, to the way we get the concluding exposition. I think it's all well considered, well put together, and I found it to be a much better piece of genre writing than I have found in this particular, that kind of creepy mystery story, that kind of, especially with a bit of a sci-fi twist to it, I have seen in quite some time. And I found it really satisfying, and it is a very remarkable achievement. I'm really glad it's in here, and that Campbell is getting this exposure for her work, because I think it's great. So that is my overall thoughts on the story and what makes it good. I really don't have like any major negative points for the story either. I didn't have anything that made me go, well, you could have not done that, and the story would have been better. Most of my minor issues with the story are matters of taste, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit more as we get into the analysis. But for now, just know that most of the little things that had me going, as I was reading it, they are personal preferences, and not flaws with the writing. And when all you have that is bothering you about a story are matters of preference, you have a very well written story that is definitely worth the time of anyone who's interested in a particular genre of story. So if you like mysteries that follow very clear patterns where you can enjoy watching the pieces be set up for you and then measured out and solved for you, or that you can try and measure out and solve for yourself as you get towards the end there, I think that is I think that Rosabell's Parthenope is really, really going to tickle your fancy. And if you're a huge fan of super creepy stories, well, I don't think it's that. But if you do enjoy that slight thrill of mystery, knowing there might be something a little more at play than what immediately meets the eye, I think you'll also enjoy Rosabell's Parthenope. It's not, I think, going to really grab any hardcore horror readers, but it also doesn't seem to have been built for them either. So I think that's okay. Let's get into the analysis here, because there are a couple of things that I think are worth talking about in the way the story is set up. So, first of all, there's an excellent red herring in here, and that is the constant discussion of hallucinogenic properties of drugs. Okay, I understand why the dispensary on the Parthenope has all of these restrictions about, drugs. They can be addictive, they can be hallucinogenic, they can cause all kinds of health problems. And that is both a red herring and a setup, because I was wondering if maybe, for at least for some time, I was wondering if maybe one of Jenna's coworkers was robbing the dispensary in an attempt to, sell these drugs on some kind of black market, and was some of these deaths were a result of either dosages being incorrect or people being silenced to keep this crime quiet. That's ultimately not what happened, but by introducing this idea of hallucinogenic drugs and controlled substances, and implicitly through that concept a black market for these things, Campbell does a really good job of distracting us from what's actually going on. I really like that. That is classic mystery writing, and it also sets up the eventual reveal that no, the computer is misprogrammed and it is not properly diluting the drugs that it's dispensing. One thing that did kind of bother me, and again, this is one of those taste things. We are introduced to Homunculus, which is the hub station that Parthenope is headed to drop off its patients, and it takes probably half a page for it to become clear that Homunculus is in fact some kind of central medical hub. For a little while there, I was wondering if it was some kind of computer program or like a database. I know in the library world there was a lot of really cutesy names for your software that handled various functions. And at one point, one of the computer experts says he's talking to Homunculus, and it's not made clear that he's not talking to some other computer or some maybe even a software company or something like that, because homunculus means kind of like this man-made life form. So that especially in a sci-fi story, that immediately put me into a mindset of AI or some kind of other artificial life form. And it turns out it was just a space station, which does eventually become clear. But given the kind of story and the connotations of the name, I would have made it clearer what that was sooner on, because it's not even a red herring. It's not a little bit of sleight of hand. I was wondering for a time why we were talking about the dispensary so much, and I wasn't sure if it was a red herring or the heart of the mystery, but I knew that was going to be important in some way, because this is a very tightly written short story and every detail should be important. So when Homunculus came up and it wasn't immediately explained to me what it was, I was trying to fit it into the pattern of the story, and it turns out it wasn't a part of the story. I think it would have been a little better just to make it clearer what part of the puzzle this is. It's a very minor part, right? It's their ultimate destination. And I would have liked to know that a little bit sooner. Just, again, a small nitpick, a point of personal preference. Not a big deal. The bathyuretane mystery was very interesting. Changing the M to a B to show that the abbreviation of units was off in the computer that ran the dispensary. That was an interesting bit of foreshadowing. That, along with all of the discussion of the way the dispensary works, I'm of two minds about. A lot of that detail is not necessary to build up to the climax of the story, but it kind of creates it creates that distraction, that red opportunities for those red herrings, keep people from figuring out what's going on too quickly. And it is the kind of thing I can see people thinking about on a regular basis as they're dealing with strange deaths in a hospital setting. Because when you are dealing with drugs, you are dealing with potentially very dangerous chemicals. I think, I don't know, I felt at some point that we dwelled on it a little too much, but I don't know, as since I don't have a contrary version of the story where we have fewer of those details, I don't know if taking out some of the extraneous details, like specifically how Jenna goes and retrieves a dosage from it and has to put it in her authorization. I don't know if taking those details out would reduce the impact of the dispensary as a red herring for the ghost, and yet also not make it clear that it's screwing up the dosage of the drugs. There is really just one offhand mention of the fact that the dispensary program automatically dilutes the drugs. And I did have a moment where I went, I wonder if that has anything to do with what's going on. But, all this other talk about the different aspects of the dispensary and the existence of the ghost in the computer programming kept me thinking about other things enough that I was still kind of puzzling over it by the time I reached the climax of the story. I think that's good, and I don't know how much you can tweak that and, either increasing or decreasing it and maintain, that level of ambiguity by the end of the story. Because you don't want people to settle too heavily on the dispensary being robbed or, people being poisoned or something like that from the dispensary. But you really want to hold on to the people's sense of fair play, which is important, I think, in a mystery story like this. Can't completely obscure the dispensary as a possible angle for this problem either. So, yeah, I felt like between a description of the drugs and repeated uses of its name and some other things like that, there was a lot of detail around the dispensary that put a very high degree of scrutiny on it. And I was a little impatient with that by the time I reached the end of the story, because it was becoming more and more clear to me that this had something to do with what was going on. I don't know if you really tweak it a whole lot and still have that really fun sense of fair play at the end of the story. I think, and also it's a short story. Like, I think the only way to sort this out for sure would be to get maybe 3 different beta readers and give each of them a different version of the story where you had different levels of discussion about the dispensary and the drug and so forth. And that's a lot of work for, honestly, a fairly short story. So maybe if there was a novel length version of this story somewhere down the line, that might be a worthwhile experiment to do. It's definitely something I've been going back and forth about in my head since I finished the story. All in all, though, I think that since you can't really measure these things effectively, and also, every audience member is going to bring a different level of genre savvy and attention to detail to your stories, probably erring on the side of having more is better. So, yeah, I'm not saying completely ignore this feedback, but it's something I thought about. But it also may just be a side effect of being somebody who has read a lot of mysteries and already thinks about the information I get in a particular way. So yeah, it's a hard thing. It's a very subjective thing to work out. All in all, really great work. I enjoyed the heck out of this story. I've been thinking about it a lot. I love mysteries, and this one really satisfied me, in spite of the fact that there are, a couple of things um, that would have been better presented to me. Um, and yeah, I'm really glad that we are getting this kind of story in Anvil magazine. It's really um, spreading out the kind of stories it presents, and yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. Very good work, Miss Campbell. I enjoyed your story a great deal. Let me know what you think of Rosabell's Parthenope down in the comments if you've read it. If you haven't, you know why. I look forward to hearing from you. While you're down there, there's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.